Okay, Pauper Elves. Match 5, we're on play. This hand is so awful. So we're gonna mulligan. We can't keep 5 land hands. We can keep 1 land hands all day long with this deck, but 5 land hands are not acceptable. And this is much, much, much better. Keep this, our opponent mulliganed as well. Sylvan Ranger. So that finds us a blue source, which we currently do not have, but we don't currently have a distant melody to even need the blue source. So I think I'm going to get rid of it. I'd rather have a Timberwatch Elf or an actual distant melody, so I know to start looking for blue. My next question is whether I want to play Finhorn Elves turn 1 and then 3 mana worth of cards turn 2. I think I do. I think that's better than being able to attack with Nettle Sentinel on the next turn. If I get to play 3 mana worth of stuff next turn, then I can play Nettle Sentinel and a Visionary. Okay, Ancient Den. Our opponent's either on Kuldotha Jeskai or Affinity, most likely. Nettle Sentinel is interesting. I still want to be able to play this Visionary and keep cycling through our deck. But I could play Nettle Sentinel, and attack for 1 and just get my beat down on. That actually sounds pretty good. I think I'm going to try that. I did want to play this Elvis Visionary, but being able to attack for a lot is kind of cool too. Number 1, number 2, and we'll pass the turn to our opponent and see if they can keep up with this quick start. Alright, our opponent passes. We will start by attacking with all. We could use this mana from Finhorn Elves, but unless we draw into something with our Elvish Visionary, we're not going to need that mana. And we can't play something pre-combat because we want to be able to use our stuff to untap our Nettle Sentinels. So we draw here. Another distant melody. That's quite bad. The first one is great because then when we draw blue, we're just doing great. But the second one is not very useful, because we'll probably either cast 1 and win or cast none and not need the second one. Springleaf Drum, Thoughtcast, Flare Husk. Okay. Our opponent has a 1/1. Quirion Ranger. That's certainly interesting. So the big question is, am I willing to trade off one of my 1/1s for a Germ? I think because it provides any color of mana for our opponent, so they can cast Atog or Carapace Forger, or even a Disciple of the Vault if they need black, I think it's worth it to trade. So I'm going to do that. Our opponent is very likely going to block unless they very much need that colored mana. Okay, apparently they do need the colored mana. They could also have a bolt of some sort that they want to use. And I'm going to save this Quirion Ranger in hand. It lets me untap my Nettle Sentinels next turn, which is pretty important. Our opponent has a Great Furnace for red, and they're able to get green mana off the Springleaf Drum. So they get to cast 2 of their threats as opposed to just 1 of them like we thought. And now Distant Melody. Well, that's pretty perfect. So I could get this Quirion Ranger onto the battlefield first, since it's mana neutral, since I can use it to untap a Finhorn Elf. Do I want to draw 6 cards, or do I want to keep Quirion Ranger in hand? That's a really good question. I think I'd rather draw the extra card, I'm pretty sure. So I'm going to do that. I'm not going to attack because I don't want to give away my creatures. So I'm going to tap this. Distant Melody for 6. Okay. Might as well go ahead and Well-Wisher main phase. I'm at 8 cards, so I'm going to have to discard one of these. I like all the creatures, because they make Well-Wisher better. Viridian Longbow, I guess, is pretty bad. because I don't have any Priest of Titanias to be able to. I'll have one in hand, but I don't have any on the battlefield to be able to generate a ton of mana to move this all around. So I think that's the one I want to get rid of. The second Distant Melody is obviously quite good still. No, I'm not in my discard step yet, am I? There we go. Our opponent casts Prophetic Prism. A free Frogmite. So our goal right now is to use this Wirewood Pride to attack for 8. Problems with that could be if we don't have enough attackers to outnumber their blockers, or if they have a bolt in response. So I'm going to try to play around that. Our opponent does have 2 red mana effectively available, though, with the Springleaf Drum. So now we have to do the Atog count. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So they could sacrifice up to 8 things right here. I also have the choice of trying to block and then use this Wirewood Pride on defense. But I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to block with this Elvish Visionary, because I don't want to take a lot of damage and somehow die out of nowhere to a Fling. So I could take damage and then they fling the Atog post-combat and I just lose. They would have to keep 2 mana around for that to be able to fling after combat, but in any case. Alright, so our opponent is completely tapped out of mana right now. The Springleaf Drum is tapped, they have no way to generate mana, so I think we're going to be able to win now. What we need to have is we need to have 7 Elves on the battlefield, and 4 of them attacking. So that shouldn't be difficult at all. We'll lead off with this Quirion Rangers, or this Birchlore Rangers. Tap these to play a Quirion. Tap these 2 to play a Well-Wisher. And that should be sufficient. I have 4 attackers. I'm just checking and double checking. Our opponent cannot produce mana. This Wirewood Pride is going to pump for 8, and I'm going to win the game. Yes? Okay, good. I can also attack with Finhorde Elves if I needed to, and then untap it to be able to generate green mana for Wirewood Pride. Alright, our opponent does their blocks, and then I do this. I guess one thing we could have lost to here is Gut Shot, if our opponent left a 1-1 unblocked, and then they were able to Gut Shot the 1-1 in response to this, but most lists do not play Gut Shot. Alright, and we win. We get to sideboard. So once again, we're going to bring in 4 Gleeful Sabotage and 3 Rapid Vigor. We're going to take out a Viridian Longbow, a Wirewood Pride, 2 Elvish Visionaries, the other Wirewood Pride, 1 Distant Melody, and 1 Well-Wisher. And we'll see how this goes. Alright, we're on the draw. We have a Rapid Vigor. We have 2 Birchlore Rangers to produce blue for this Distant Melody. But we only have 1 Forest and no good mana elves. We just have the Birchlore Rangers. I think this is fine. We have a lot of mana elves that we can draw. Even drawing a forest would be okay here, so we're going to keep it and see what happens. Our opponent has Flare Husk turn 1. We drew Gleeful Sabotage, which is pretty good if we're able to cast it with Conspire. We will not be blocking this germ as we need the mana pretty desperately. And our opponent misses their second land drop. So we can play a Birchlore Ranger here, and we have another mana, but we can't do anything with it. So we really, well, I guess we don't really need to draw a mana source. We really need to draw a mana source or not have one of these Birch Lore Rangers killed. Then we'll have 2 mana next turn. So now I have a very important choice to make. How am I going to play this game? I could just Gleeful Sabotage that mountain, or that Great Furnace, right now, and then attack for 2. I could Gleeful Sabotage and kill it, and the Flayer Husk and not attack at all. I think I want to get a little bit more of a board state, though, and when I Gleeful Sabotage, I want to Conspire and hit 2 lands. So when my opponent eventually draws another land, then I want to really get him. So this is a little bit awkward if my opponent draws Electrickery, me letting them get up to 2 lands. Or if they have Electrickery, they draw the second land so they can overload it. But that's really the only situation where that's not good. So they cast a Star. Which one is that? Okay, that's the one that they get to draw a card when it's put into the graveyard for any reason, so I don't want to get rid of that. Although it does fix their mana. So I thought a lot about what I'm going to do here, and I think this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to play out just a few more elves before I start attacking. And I have the Timberwatch Elf here to protect me from a bolt. So only Electrickery exactly would be awful for me here, because I don't have Wrap and Vigor up. So our opponent goes land, free Frogmite into Thoughtcast, into Springleaf Drum, which is another mana. So Gleeful Sabotage, even Conspiring, might not be good enough here, since Springleaf Drum can be a mana source. And they play a Mirror Enforcer. Okay, so we might be doing a little bit differently here now. Yeah, I think we are. So I have a lot of really conflicting desires right now. I want to Gleeful Sabotage and get rid of those creatures. I want to Timberwatch Elf and attack for a lot. I want a Distant Melody. I want to get this Lissalana down so I can start making tokens. And I'm really not sure what the best plan is. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to play Lissalana. Because our opponent had such an explosive turn, we need to go a little bit wider and a little bit bigger before we try to win the game. Just taking out the lands or just taking out the Frogmite and the Mirror Enforcer probably is not going to be enough now. So I want the potential to generate some more value. So now Electrickery is not a big deal because I can save the Well-Wisher and only quote-unquote take out 3 creatures and we'll still have lots of mana remaining. So I think we can pass another turn without having Wrap and Vigor available for Electrickery because we're pretty well set up against it right now. If we can Distant Melody into some more Gleeful Sabotages, that'd be pretty good, because then we can get rid of creatures and lands instead of having to decide. Our opponent casts another Thoughtcast, is going to attack for 4. Right now, they're basically inviting us to use the Timberwatch Elf on either the Well-Wisher or the Lissalana or itself after blocking, and then they'll blow us out in response with a Bolt. The question is if we want to walk into that. I think we kind of do, actually. So the question is which one we want to do that with. So with only one elf in hand, Lissalana might be the least important card here. So I'm going to target Lissalana with this, and if our opponent has a removal spell and they use it on Lissalana, that means they're not using it on Timberwatch Elf. Okay, so they're going to get us with Electrickery. Alright, so we walked into Electrickery. We didn't get to save our Well-Wisher, which is unfortunate. However, we are going to get to kill this Mirror Enforcer. Oh, no, we're not, because this is resolving afterward. So if we do it, then we're losing our Lissalana. Do we want to trade 1 for 1 right now? No, I think this game is going to go on long enough, and the tokens that we're going to make are going to be important enough to draw with Distant Melody that we don't want to block. And our opponent casts yet another Thoughtcast. And they tap out. So I think it's time to start casting creatures, start making tokens. So I'm going to go ahead and pump up our Lissalana, untap that, return the forest, so that I can get Maximum value here. Going to Gleeful Sabotage with Conspire. I'm going to blow up this Frogmite. Tap to untap creatures. Get to Conspire. Get rid of the Mirror Enforcer as well. Then I get to pump up the Lissalana again. Attack for 11. And hope our opponent does not have another Electrickery. Although, in fact, we could untap the Timberwatch Elf and save another creature, so it would only take out one thing. Our opponent sacks a Star for blue mana. Has a Somber Hoverguard. And a Carapace Forger. And an Atog. However, they are completely tapped out of mana now, which is good to know. So because we can activate Timberwatch and then use Quirion Ranger to activate it again, we have 8 power worth of pump on the table. So our opponent has to go block, block, and block on our creatures, which is important to know. I want to make our opponent sacrifice as much as possible to keep Atog alive. Casting this Well-Wisher pre-combat, making a token, and I'm going to attack. And our opponent is now going to block, block, block on 3 separate creatures, or they're going to lose. So we shall see what they do. Okay, our opponent has decided on blocks. If we decide to pump up Quirion Ranger once, it will get +6/+6 and be a 7/7. And our opponent will have to sacrifice 2 things to survive, or for the Atog to survive. So I think I'm going to start with that, because Atog is pretty scary. Now the question is whether I want to use it again, and it appears our opponent has tapped out. Are we okay with saving our Lissalana and then our opponent being able to save their Atog by sacrificing 2 things? Or actually, it's 3 things. Yeah, I think that's absolutely worth it. So let's see if our opponent sacrifices a bunch of stuff to try to keep the Atog alive or get the Quirion Ranger off the table. The Quirion Ranger is very good right now, but if our opponent sacrifices enough things that the Atog has to stay alive, then our opponent's going to be very down on resources. Alright, our opponent starts by sacrificing the Flare Husk. Sacrifices a land and another land. Alright. And the Atog still died. I don't know that they meant to do that. That was curious. Yeah, I think our opponent needed to sacrifice one more thing to keep that alive. Prophetic Prism. And we win the match. Well, we completed the league 4-1. We get a booster, a QP, and 150% of our play point entry, so 120 points for our treble, which is pretty excellent. It's not quite the 5-0 result we put up last time with Mono Black, but it's still very impressive. My thoughts going into this league, even after having playtested a lot, was that Elves is more of a combo aggro deck, where they try to assemble all their pieces and kill you very quickly on turn 3 or 4, and then if your opponent interacts, you just lose. There's a lot of cards that feel like you can't beat, like Shrivel, or Electrickery, or Evenkar's Justice, or Pestilence. And it turns out that we won a game where Shrivel, plus another 1 damage effect was cast, and we just won that last game where Electrickery was cast. So the Elves deck actually has more resiliency than I thought. Due to the fact that this deck is explosively powerful in the early game, and has enough resiliency to sometimes win late game even when you're disrupted, is very impressive. Often when you win fast, and often when you lose fast, which makes it a pretty good deck for people trying to jam matches quickly. I had a ton of fun playing, and I'm pretty pleased with the results. I hope you enjoyed watching. If you did enjoy the video, don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you can see all the cool new stuff we come out with. And you can follow me on Twitter at JakeStylesMTG with any future Pennywise Pauper news. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.